Okay, hi everybody, my name is Jeff Carpenter. I'm an assistant professor in the School of Education. I'm also the director of the Teaching Fellows program. So I'm here to talk with you guys a little bit today about Twitter. I don't own stock in Twitter. I was actually a Twitter skeptic for many years. I thought it was self-promotion, celebrity stalking, and teenagers oversharing about their lives. But fortunately, I was disabused of that notion and have learned that there's actually a lot of teaching and learning applications of Twitter. So I'm going to talk today about some of the stuff I've done with Twitter in terms of using it to expand conversations from my classroom, and then also attempts that I've made to try and use it to seed professional network activity by my future teachers. So sort of what motivated me to get on Twitter and see if I could use it was a two-part challenge. One part was stuff related to @Elon, my students, their experiences here, and then the other part was challenges for when my students graduate and go out into the teaching force and have to continue to learn about teaching. So in terms of what my students do at Elon, the two challenges that I face are I prepare students who are going to teach 7 different content areas, and although I might like to think that I'm a bit of a polymath, I can't actually keep up with 7 different content areas. So math, science, history, English, Spanish, PE, health, and music. I just can't be an expert on all of those topics, and so that's a challenge for me because the students always want to know, how do I apply this in my content area? And sometimes I can come up with an example on the spot, and sometimes I have no idea. Okay, so that's a challenge for me. And then the other thing is there's a shortage of mentoring resources that we can provide through traditional means to our students. So this is not to say that the mentor teachers we have are not outstanding, but it's unrealistic to expect one person to provide all the mentoring resources that young aspiring teachers need. That's just not reality. And so these are things that I face as an instructor with my students here on campus. And then the other thing that I have in mind is when my students leave Elon, they need to continue learning because as those of us who are engaged in teaching know, it is a task that you never master, right? There's always more that you need to learn about teaching. And so I like to say it's more than one lifetime's work to become a master teacher. And so we're not doing good enough if we just teach them all we can for 4 years and then think that they're done, right? We have to get them in a mindset where they're continuing to learn after they leave Elon. Then the other challenge in terms of after they leave Elon is the way schools are set up, teachers are actually often quite isolated from their peers. So they spend almost all their day with teenagers or little kids, and they have very few opportunities to talk with other professionals and improve in their craft. So that's sort of the challenge or the challenges that I face. And so Twitter is one way that I've tried to address those challenges. So Twitter can provide access to a lot of experts and practitioners. Twitter would not be as powerful as it is for me if there were not a bunch of K-12 teachers using it. But there are a bunch of K-12 teachers and educators more broadly using it. And so it's a great way to get my students in conversation with the larger education field. So for all 7 of my content areas, there are thousands of educators who regularly tweet and are happy to interact with random Elon students about their content area. So when we talk about flipped learning in my class, and my music ed students aren't really sure how that would work because all my examples are from when I was an English teacher, they can go to Twitter and get in conversation with music educators and say, how would flipping work in a music setting? Okay? So it's a way for them to access teachers, also principals, authors of books that they read for classes. So there's a lot, not every author out there is on Twitter, but some of them are. So one of the foundational books that most education students read is Understanding by Design by Wiggins and McTighe. Well, Wiggins is a beast on Twitter, okay? So he will interact with students. He doesn't just self-promote, he'll actually answer questions and interact with the students. And then the mentoring is there as well. So some of the teachers on Twitter it's very sort of technical. I'm going to share knowledge that I have. I'm going to share websites. But others are on Twitter just sort of encouraging their other educators. You know, students will say, I'm struggling with X, and somebody on Twitter will say, well, have you thought about doing this? Or just say, we all struggle with X. It's okay. You'll get over it eventually. So mentoring as well. And then in terms of the time after Elon, the thing that Twitter can potentially do is get students hooked into these networks of teachers on Twitter who are going to be there when I'm no longer there, right? So they'll graduate, they'll move on. Our students now are not so much from North Carolina, so they're going to go to other states, and it may not be easy for me to keep up with them, but there's all these teachers on Twitter who they can still have access to potentially. The key thing about Twitter that may help you understand sort of why it works for educators is the hashtags. So you may be familiar with hashtags that are kind of silly. I love multiple choice tests. Hashtag said no student ever, right? So many times people tweet with hashtags that are not really purposeful. But what educators have figured out with Twitter is that you can have purposeful hashtags that link people in conversation who have similar interests. So there is a hashtag for pretty much everything in education. Every content area has multiple hashtags. It's not just math chat, the hashtag. There's hashtags for algebra, for geometry, for everything. And so those hashtags are where educators find each other who have similar interests. So a teacher in California and a teacher in North Carolina who might never have met otherwise meet via the Eng chat, English, so that's an English content area chat. They meet, they realize, oh, we're both trying to flip our English classes and we're kind of pioneers in this. Let's actually start a Google Drive together, share our resources, co-create curriculum, and then we start doing Google Hangouts. Oh, and then we get our students interacting. That's a real story, right? So if two teachers, opposite sides of the countries, never would have interacted were it not through the professional networks that exist on Twitter. And the hashtags are a big part of that. So what have my students thought about Twitter? They're overwhelmingly positive about the use of Twitter in the course. Okay? So I don't have a single student who has hated the use of Twitter in the course. I have some students who start off as skeptics, but they all see value in the use of it during the course. So I have my students participate in Twitter chats, which are synchronous Twitter conversations that are a little different than sort of typical Twitter use, but educators are big into the Twitter chats. There's over 200 of them per week. And so one of my students said chats were oddly invigorating. And this is actually a student who was a Twitter skeptic at the beginning of the semester. She thought, like I did, Twitter is just people sharing pictures of what they ate for dinner. A little anecdote from Twitter. So one of my students was in a Twitter conversation, and the author of the textbook she used in her English methods class retweeted something she said. So Carol Jago, big person in the field of English education, retweets something my student said. And my student was levitating for the next week. She was so excited and affirmed and felt like, wow, I'm participating in a high-level conversation about my profession. And she said, sort of before that experience, that she had not considered herself a teacher yet. We call our students teacher candidates, but some of them don't really get into that mindset. And this was a clear case where this professional activity with other educators outside of Elon really made her feel like, okay, I'm not just an Elon student, I'm a member of a profession. They also do recognize that Twitter has its limitations. So they like its use in class. They haven't all drank the Kool-Aid 100%, and that's fine with me. But so this is an example of one student who did sort of say that Twitter can supply you with information, but you don't necessarily act on that information. And Twitter by itself might not provide you with enough information to act in all occasions. So sort of my impression of Twitter is definitely that as the students perceive, it has enhanced my class. There's been multiple cases where something we talk about in class and only have limited time for, the students are still interested in it, want to learn more, and so they take it into the Twitterverse and they continue to have conversations about it beyond what we could do in class time. And so that's been powerful. What's a little bit uncertain, though, is whether, so my second challenge was sort of after they leave Elon, right, what's going to happen with them, and the jury is still out on that. So I follow up with my students. I teach them typically when they're juniors or seniors, and I follow up with them after they student teach, and I ask, did you continue to use Twitter? That there would be no requirement during student teaching. And over the last 3 years, it's been about 40% continue use during student teaching. So 60% of them drop it for whatever reason. And I don't know that 100% is my goal, but not everybody during student teaching is seeing this as a way to deal with the many items on their plate as a student teacher. Some of them see it as, this is another item on my plate and I can't handle it. I'm too busy in the day-to-day, so I'm going to put it aside. So not entirely certain that it is the sort of solution for all kids in terms of getting them networked immediately, but for the 40% that are doing it, they have found use. Student teaching is very demanding, and a lot of them barely sleep or eat, and they're finding reason to get on Twitter and find resources there and continue the activity. And some of them several years out. So this is, Elaine is from my first group of students who use Twitter, and she's now in her 3rd year of teaching, and she's still using Twitter. She actually uses it with her students, tweets out stuff about what they're doing in classes. And if you really want to learn more, I've done a bunch of research on this, so that's there for you as a resource. Thank you.